Welcome to the BetterWallet podcast, a podcast where we talk to everyday people who have changed their lives through managing their money. We talk about their money journeys, the good, the bad, and the ugly. At least once a month, we'll have a new episode where you can learn how to manage your money better. We're going to be simplifying the money-related topics that keep people up at night, including budgeting, paying off debt, investing, and how to build a business. The goal is to make money a less taboo, everyday topic. Now here's your host, Mark Russell.
Welcome everyone to the BetterWallet podcast. I cannot explain how excited I am to actually have a podcast. My whole financial journey started from listening to podcasts when I was taking my 1-hour commute to work back in 2015, and podcasts really helped to change my life. So my name is Mark. You guys know me from Instagram on BetterWallet. And you guys know what my mission is on BetterWallet. It's all about helping you make better financial decisions in order to change your life, in order to change your family's lives. Online, you guys know I talk a lot about budgeting, paying off debt, investing, growing your business, and just overall motivation as you're going through your journey. And I wanted to build this podcast and host this podcast to really bring what I post online to life through real life, raw, uncut stories of not only my own story, but also the guests that I bring onto the podcast. Now, the podcast is going to be ever changing. So, the first few episodes are going to be different from some of the others, but the same general theme is going to be within the podcast where we're going to talk through everything that happens to, be under the topic of money and really drill into different topics in order to demystify the topic of money and, help you live a better life through money management. Because you guys know there's only so much I can actually post online. So I wanted to have this podcast to bring everything to life. And as I mentioned, it's going to be raw, uncut, and I wanted to, talk through why I do what I do. So for this first episode, I'm going to talk through my own personal journey. Personal journey that frankly I've never really told. I haven't told all of what I'm all about online. I haven't told my complete story on my Instagram page. So I wanted the podcast to essentially be able to do that, and then also tell the other stories of other people who have done something similar. So let me just start with my story. Most of you guys know it, but I wanted to expand upon it a little bit more so you know what I'm all about. But as I mentioned, my name is Mark Russell, founder of BetterWallet. And my story comes from very humble beginnings. So I was born in Kensington, Philadelphia, which is also known as the heroin district of the country. The issues that Kensington had to essentially deal with back in the 90s when I was born are the same issues that they're dealing with today. And unfortunately, not much has changed. Both my mom and my dad, they abuse drugs, just to be kind of frank. My mom still kind of goes through her cycles. My dad is completely removed from that. But, back in the 90s, they were very much into that drug scene. So when I was born, I was actually born with a crack baby, pre-me. I was a ICU alumni is what I call it. But I was born, a pretty small kid that didn't really have a really good chance to survive. They didn't think I was going to make it. And because of my mom's drug addiction, unfortunately, they had to detox me as a little kid in order to get the drug out of my system as much as they could, which unfortunately I don't remember, but it's a part of my story. So I was immediately placed into foster care, of course, because my mom couldn't, support me. And most of my childhood, 13 years of my life, I bounced from home to home throughout the Pennsylvania foster care system, going from group homes to individual homes. And I lived with all types of different people, which was a blessing because at an early age, I got to experience different cultures, different ways of going about doing things. I lived with black folks, white folks. I lived with the Amish for a little bit, right? So I had a wild understanding of how people and cultures operate. And it just gave me a strong appreciation for people and what makes us different, but also what makes us unique. So, as I mentioned, 13 years of my life going through foster care, and it helped to change, or maybe not even change, but round my perspective on the world. Because I didn't know anything, right? So I didn't have a mom and a dad to tell me, hey, well, here's what's right, here's what's wrong, here's our viewpoint, right? My viewpoint was shaped by what I saw and what I experienced throughout those 13 years. So, for those 13 years, I had to build my own sense of identity. I didn't have a grandmother, a grandfather to say, "Oh, well, they're a carpenter, so maybe I'm going to become a carpenter." Or, they're really smart, so maybe I'm going to be really smart. Right? I had to spend 13 years essentially figuring it out. When I was a kid, I started visiting this one home in central Pennsylvania. It's called Mount Union, Pennsylvania, and it's a very small rural town right below where Penn State University is at. And I had that foster home. I was kind of bouncing around to other foster homes as well, but that was my primary place in which I was raised from, 9 until 13 when I was adopted by that same family. And my upbringing there was really interesting because it was my first time actually having a mother and a father, both African American as well. And I didn't really have as many African American families that I lived with during those 13 years of foster care. So I got to understand what my culture was all about, something that I always wanted to learn. But of course, at that time, I couldn't just go to Google and, figure out, what my culture was all about. So it gave me a really great understanding of not only my culture, but also what it means to become successful, right? So in their head, success wasn't the dollar figure, it wasn't a job. It was, can you wake up every morning and are you happy? Right? So they taught me the importance of just being happy and just being comfortable with who you are as a person. And I will never forget that. When I was adopted into a family. I had four other sisters, older sisters that were already a part of the family. And it was just interesting. It was interesting going through foster care, being adopted by this family, and actually having someone who accepted me, right? Because when you go through foster care, just for anyone who's not part of the foster care system, you essentially live those 13 years of your life. You're bouncing from home to home, and you just think that no one's going to adopt you. And it's sad. Like, as I think about it now, it's really sad because once you hit, let's say 11 or 12, you just put in your head that no one's going to adopt you, right? No one actually cares about you as a person, as a kid. And you just assume that, once you hit 18, you're going to what they call age out of the system, and you're just going to be fed to the world, right? Fed to the sharks at 18 without no understanding of the world, no formal education, anything of that nature. But luckily, I was blessed enough to actually, get adopted at 13. So, having that father, having that mother was huge for me to round my understanding of the world. My father, because I never really had a father figure. Some of the times when I was in group homes, it was a single mother, which I was very grateful for. But I never really had that father figure. And my father name was Michael Russell. We have the same name. I'll explain that a little bit later. He was everything that you could ever want in a dad, right? So living in Central PA, we would go fishing together. He taught me how to cut grass. He taught me how to iron my clothes, tie my tie, right? Like all the things that like a father would like teach you how to do. And I never really had a father before. So it was great to have someone like him just kind of teach me the ropes of life. So to kind of round out how close I was to him, when I was adopted, I actually changed my name to his name. So my formal name, some people don't know this. My formal name is Michael Marcel Russell. I was born Marcel Walker, and then when I was adopted, I changed my first name to Michael. So, and I moved my first name, my prior first name, to my middle name. So now my name is Michael Marcel Russell. And my friends used to call me, and they still call me Mark for short, because they don't want to say Marcel. I guess they don't like two syllables, but whatever. Um, so that's where that name comes from, and it kind of explains how close I was to my dad. So one thing my parents were really big on was education. In my small town, unfortunately, I still didn't escape the world of drugs. My small town, because there's nothing really to do there, people naturally gravitate towards doing drugs. Smoking cigarettes, then, next thing that you know, doing pills. Next thing you know, you're doing harder drugs. And that was just the reality of how I grew up. Luckily, I wasn't in that scene at all, never did any drugs when I was, in high school or college or anything of that nature. So blessed to say that was not a part of my life. Mostly out of fear, right? Like I knew what drugs did to you, just knowing my mom and my dad and what they had to go, my biological mom and dad, and why I was in foster care in the first place. So I stayed away from all that stuff. I was a kid that was like, I'm never going to smoke a cigarette because, cigarettes are drugs and I don't want to become addicted, blah, blah, blah. So, as I mentioned, my family really prioritized education. And, I knew one day I just wanted to get out of the town and I wanted to live the life that I always dreamed of. I didn't know what that was or how I was going to get there, but I just knew what I was currently living in wasn't it. So, my mom was a high security prison guard and my dad was in the Navy, but his 9 to 5 was working at a warehouse. I mean, literally, the guy moved boxes for a living from one conveyor belt to another conveyor belt. And it was a hard job for both of them. My mom actually had to medically retire because of an issue that happened at the prison, and it led to a back injury, and that led to back surgery, and she had to medically retire. And my dad, he stood on his feet working a blue collar job for a majority of his life. And I would never forget how hard he had to work to put food on the table. So both my mom and my dad lost their parents pretty early in life. My mom lost her mother in a fire, actually, when she was 18 or around that age. And my dad lost his dad when he was about 18. He actually died in the Navy. I heard the story was that he fell off the ship or something of that nature. So my adopted mom and dad had to take care of their siblings early on in life, and they essentially had to be adults for them, as soon as they became an adult, become parents for them as they became an adult. So they couldn't go off to college even if they wanted to, right? They needed to find ways to, you know, generate income in order to pay for food and such for their siblings. So that's why they really focused in on education and why they wanted me to, essentially go off to school, even though we had no way of really paying for it. So, being an adoptee at that time, I always thought college was going to be paid for. There was a rule in place back then where if you're a prior foster child, you can go off to school. But I want to say the year before, or a couple of years before, Pennsylvania removed that rule. And that is the reason why I had to essentially pay for college. And it's kind of crazy how life works, right? Like I was, if I would have went to school a few years before, I would have went to school for free. But somewhat besides the point. But it's just how my life kind of worked. So, a lot of my friends around me, they were all, let's just say, entrepreneurs, but they weren't paying taxes. So, a lot of my mentors in growing up, besides my dad, a lot of my mentors weren't doing the right thing. They were, essentially drug dealers. They were doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But that's all I knew, right? Like I gravitated towards them because they had the money, they had the cars, they had the girls, like they had everything that I thought I wanted as a kid. They were the cool guys. And they helped mentor me when I was growing up in a small town. And, when I received good grades, they would say, you want to make sure you're going off to college. So they had the right mindset for me, even though that they didn't live by what they preached, right? But like once I got good grades, they would buy me new pairs of shoes. They would give me money. I'm very grateful for those folks because they helped to course correct me anytime that I was falling off. So, after junior year, I started applying for schools, and luckily I had pretty decent grades in high school. I graduated top of my class. I started applying for schools, and one of the schools I applied to was Penn State, which was in my backyard. And, luckily I got into the main campus, which was a big deal. Not many people, first of all, went to college from my graduating class. My high school in general, no one really goes off to college. It's very much a blue collar. Like you graduate from high school and you go work for a blue collar job, you become a mechanic, you become a trucker, whatever it might be. They're really into the trades, right? So we had like a trade school that was nearby and people did that. But no one really went off to a 4-year university. And I kind of lived a life of, yeah, I wanted to be different. I wanted to do things differently and said, hey, like, why not give it a try? So, as I mentioned, applied to Penn State, got into Penn State, and I didn't know how the heck I was going to pay for it. So, I was in college, it's 2008. 2008 is when the financial crisis was happening, right? And I'm trying to get a loan for college during the financial crisis, and I had no way of paying this money back. I didn't know if I was going to go and get a job like afterwards. And I'm asking and begging for money from the university. And there was literally no reason for why they would give me any type of funding, especially how much I was looking for. I was looking for about $20,000 a year in order to pay for everything I needed to pay for my freshman year. So on campus, I used to visit the student aid office every day and literally beg them for money. And, frankly, I'm very happy for that experience because I learned telling my story, negotiating sales, right? Pitching myself very early on, at 18, 17, 18. I'm learning how to do that because I needed to pay for my tuition because my mom and my dad didn't have any money to pay for that. And again, like it's during the middle of the financial crisis, like who just has $20,000 that you could just push out, right? So freshman year was tough. I'm not only adjusting to a bigger school when the bigger schools in the country, and I grew up in a small town where I graduated with a class of 100. Now I'm in, a graduating class of thousands. It was an adjustment. So you have the adjustment to just the overall culture of being at a bigger school, a bigger city, more students all around, and then you're also taking on, or at least I did, I took on 18 credits my first semester. And it was tough, especially when you're trying to, get $20,000 per year in order to pay for schooling. So, I'm working odd jobs during that year, and that was the theme of my college career, just working odd jobs in order to, pay for school and negotiating and the student aid office and yelling and fighting back and forth with them. And, freshman year, I was able to get through all my classes. And at the end of my freshman year, I was able to pay off 19,000 through grants, scholarships, odd jobs. I had some loans as well, and I was able to pay off $19,000 of that 20,000. And I was really happy about that, right? Like I was like, oh man, Penn State won't care. Like I only owe them 1,000. I could pay that off during the course of the summer, and I was sadly mistaken that when it comes down to these universities are businesses at the end of the day. They wanted their money, and they sent me a pretty short note the last week, literally during my finals. And they said, hey, like you owe $1,000. If you don't pay back that $1,000, you will essentially be kicked out of Penn State. And I totally missed that letter. I don't know how. I mean, I know how. I was working on finals, and they wanted to send that note during that time. And I had so many other things going on. So in addition to finals, finals week, my dad's dad, my uncle Ray, actually died from cardiac arrest. He was dealing with heart issues his entire life, but God called him up. I believe it was May of 2009. And it was a tough time for my family. In fact, because I had finals, I actually couldn't attend the funeral. So, I'm getting kicked out of Penn State. I'm doing my finals. My uncle died all within the same month. So that was tough. I eventually got kicked out of Penn State, which I don't talk about all too much online because of just a series of things that happened during that summer of '09. And, it was just tough. It was tough for the family. It's tough for me, kind of dealing with that, trying to get back into school. I was writing letters to everyone that I knew at Penn State in order to try to get back in. People in the highest of powers. I was messaging them, trying to get back into school. So, a few months go by, and I'm talking to my dad and I say, hey, like, we need to find a way to pay for school so I can get back in. And then I found out that not only did I owe that $1,000, I actually now owed more than that because Penn State took my student aid away. So when you go through what they call a retroactive registration, when this happens when you get kicked out of school and you have to apply back into school, they actually remove all your student aid that you applied for, and then you have to come out of pocket in order to pay off the outstanding amount, which was not fun at all. So my dad actually had to take out a loan in order to pay for that. And then I had to reapply back into Penn State. And, a couple people had to pull some strings in order to get me back in. But one day, July of 2009, I actually got back into school. It was July 16th of 2009. And I'll explain to you why I know it's that specific day, though I can't remember the dates of other things. So July 16th, 2009, I get back into school. I remember my dad sending me the email and saying, "Hey, like, you got back in, like, congratulations." And, I couldn't do anything but thank him. And during that summer, I was actually working with him at the same warehouse that I mentioned where he worked. And I was doing, a summer job. And during that summer job, I was making maybe $300 over the course of 2 weeks. And that was going to help me to pay for school, right? I was preparing for the next year. And we would commute to work together. And, July 16th of 2009, we're commuting to work, and he was just telling me, my dad, how happy he was that I got back into school, how proud he was of adopting me, how excited he was that, one day I'm going to graduate. And that, meant the world to me. I mean, literally, it was a great day. It was great to kind of hear that. My dad wasn't a overly emotional person. He didn't really say all too much, but when he did speak, his words were powerful. And the fact that he mentioned that in the way that he did, especially after spending a lot of years of my life not really having anyone telling me that, they love me or that they appreciate me as a person, to kind of hear that from my dad, I mean, it meant the world. And I'll never forget that moment. So, we're on the way to work. We work a normal shift. This is just a normal day for us. And, I want to say it was around 9 o'clock, my boss asked me if I wanted to do some overtime. I said, sure, no problem. My dad, who was working obviously the same shift, didn't want to work overtime. So he ended up going back home, which was about half an hour away. And when my shift was over around 12 o'clock, he came, picked me up, and we went on our way back home. I just remember like how red his eyes were. Like I just felt like he was really, really tired. He worked 16-hour days at times, 12 to 16-hour days. And the fact that he had to come pick me up and he was willing to do that, I mean, it was great because I was able to, accumulate, 3 hours of overtime, which at the time was huge for me in order to pay for the things I needed to pay for in college. So he picked me up, his eyes were red, and, we're just kind of chatting, on our way back from work. And, he still was saying the same things that he was saying earlier in the day, just saying how proud he was of me, how I was his best friend, like all the things that you love to hear from your father, especially someone that you're extremely close to and you look up to. And we get back home, get out the car, and I go upstairs and starting to get changed, get prepared to go to bed. And I realized I didn't take a shower, so I went down, took a shower, and after the shower, I saw him on the computer, and he kind of joked, saying like, "I didn't think you were ever going to come out the shower." I said, "Oh, my bad," and like, and I go upstairs. So he goes and takes a shower, and I'm upstairs, and next thing you know, I kind of hear this loud thud, and I'm like, "Oh, what is that?" And I just thought it was something from outside. And at the time, it was just me and my dad there. My mom was there, and my mom said, "Where's Michael? Where's your dad?" And I said, "I think he's in the shower. Like, I don't know." And she was like, "I think there is something going wrong." And I was like, "Oh, like, okay." She was like, "Come downstairs now." So I ran downstairs, and my mom, I don't know how she knew this, but she was like, "I think there's something going wrong. I need you to knock down the door," right? Luckily, I was a big guy at that time, like I am now. So I was able to kind of throw my body against the door and kind of bust it open. And that moment there completely changed my life. My dad was having a cardiac arrest right in front of me. And I mean, at the time, I didn't know what the heck was going on. I wasn't a medical professional. I thought he was just choking on something and, tried CPR, tried to do whatever I thought I knew in order to try to save his life. And, I kind of held him, just at a loss for what I should do. And in my head, I was like, I'm going to save this guy's life. And my dad liked to joke a lot. So I was like, like I'm going to save his life. And I'm going to tell him, like, oh, I saved your life. Like, don't forget about that. Right. And at a certain point, I felt him taking breaths of which is still hard for me to talk about. Like, but his breaths were becoming shorter and shorter, and I just didn't know what to do. Again, like I'm 18, 19, seeing this, my mom's obviously panicking, she's freaking out, she's calling the police, she's calling whoever to come and help. And I was just there kind of holding him. And sorry, I'm getting emotional, but I just remember holding him and thinking, man, like I can't believe this is happening, but I just never really thought that it would happen the way that it did. But that moment changed my entire life. And it's only until now that I can really have that conversation more than a decade after that day happening. And, I still kind of get emotional when I talk about it. But as I mentioned, I'm going to make sure that this podcast is raw and uncut. And that's why we're here, is to demystify the topic of finance and just talk through our stories and how we got to where we're at. And so, time went on. The first responders came and, tried to revive him. And, they couldn't, unfortunately. Next thing you know, we're in the ambulance. Next thing you know, we're at the hospital. And the doctor comes in to the room that he put all the family in and said, hey, like he's gone. And that was tough. It was tough beyond anything that you could ever imagine. And it's something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, just losing a parent. And, when he died, he was there on the table, just literally anything that you could really think of, like the hospital scenes where they have like the white curtain and the family's in there and the person's right in the middle of the scene and, they're essentially gone. It's literally how they draw it up in the movies. And at that moment, I grabbed his hand and said, I'm going to be everything that you could have ever imagined me to be. I'm going to do everything that you can ever possibly want me to do as your son. And, you know, his legacy lives on through me. So that night, July 17th of 2009, it completely rocked my world. It rocked my family's world. And it's why I do what I do every single day. Because when he passed away, he didn't have a savings. He didn't have life insurance. He didn't have a 401. He didn't have any of that stuff. So not only was our number one breadwinner gone and my dad gone, we suffered, financially for some time, during the middle of financial crisis of 2009. And, like you had the funeral, and funeral was crazy because my dad was that dude. I'm not even bragging about it. Like he was such a great guy, great father, just great friend, just great overall person to be around. And, he would often hold cookouts. He will hold cookouts and bring people from my hometown to our house in order to eat, just have a hot cooked meal. And he was known as being the chef of the town. And when I tell you, like the funeral and the viewing was, I can't even remember how long it was, but it was long enough where we started in the morning. And by the time everything was done, it was dark out. It was dark. And that really showed me the impact of what one person could do to this world. And as I mentioned, I try to live on his legacy through not only what I do every single day outside of BetterWallet, but on BetterWallet as well. And that's why I give so much. But so time goes on, and we have a funeral for him down at his hometown of Mobile, Alabama, which is a small, poor city that he grew up. And, we had another viewing, and fortunately, I was able to give my last words during that funeral and viewing. And then we buried him in Alabama. And that was the last time I saw him. So I came back to Penn State because, as I mentioned, I got back in and Luckily, my dad was able to take out a loan before he passed to pay for what I needed to pay for. And that's a completely different topic. He had to get a high interest personal loan in order to pay for it. And once I got back into school, student aid kicked back in, and I was able to pay off that loan because it was still in my mom's name because they were, married. And I was back on campus. I was back on campus after a very, very, very long summer. So sophomore year comes around, and I couldn't tell you how focused I was, sophomore year. It was my first time getting Dean's List. I was doing everything I could do to just keep my mind off of what just happened. So that was, my sophomore year. Grades were good. It was just an overall just good year for me. And I could tell like that was becoming a man throughout that year because I didn't have my father around. So junior year comes around and I'm still hyper focused. I become an RA. Being an RA or resident assistant, I was essentially in charge of the kids that were, freshmen at Penn State, and they were in the same dorm that I was, and I oversaw them by, kind of hoping different programs and just making sure they didn't get in trouble. And I love that experience because I learned a lot about people management and just management in general, and kind of just being a leader on campus. I couldn't just do anything. Like I couldn't just show up drunk to my dorm because my students were there. So I had to mature quickly in college in order to kind of have this management leadership, position on campus. Sophomore year, junior year, end of junior year, I was looking for internships. No one wanted to give me an internship. And luckily, I ended up landing one internship with Macy's, out of all places, where I was a store management intern in Arlington, Virginia. And again, I didn't have any money. The internship didn't really pay all too much. So I spent those 3 months of that internship not really making too much money. I had enough money for rent, and that was pretty much it. I didn't have money for food or anything of that nature. My mom didn't have the money to really send it to me, and I didn't have any money enough where I knew that I needed internship experience, and I knew I wouldn't get a great job if I didn't have an internship experience. So I couldn't afford a mattress. And most people don't know this. I just now started talking to people about it. But for those 3 months, I slept on the floor. I slept on the floor in Arlington, Virginia, in an apartment that was, I think there was like five other people in the same, 900 square feet. And I just wanted that internship experience so bad in order for me to get a job. But slept on the floor and literally ate sticky rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 3 months, which is embarrassing to talk about now, but it's important. Again, this is raw, uncut, Better Wallet and what my life was all about. It really shaped who I am today because I don't care how much money I make. I will always remember the day and the months where I had to sleep on the ground in order to accomplish a dream that I always wanted to accomplish. So, that was the end of my junior year, the summer of my junior year. Senior year rolls around, and, I'm thinking to myself, oh man, I'm going to get myself a job. Like, I got this internship experience. My GPA is good. Like, I'm a great guy. Like, I don't have anything that is a blemish on my resume. I won't go into detail here, but 2012 was like a really tough year for a lot of different reasons for the Pennsylvania State University. And there were some things that happened on campus in prior years at Penn State that a lot of people at the university should be ashamed of and frankly should be locked up for. And luckily, they are locked up for what they did. You guys could do a simple Google search to figure out what happened in 2012 during that time. But that's a completely separate podcast. And I just get so angry, anytime that I think about what happened there back in the 80s and 90s on the Penn State campus, especially when it comes down to the football team. But it was just a tough year for Penn State, and enough where there were recruiters that said, hey, like, we're not going to recruit from Penn State anymore, even though we have, I think recruiters rank Penn State as being one of the best schools to find candidates for. And they've been ranked there very high on that list, like either one or two for years. In 2012 was the year that they weren't ranked on that list because of what happened with the football team, with Joe Paterno, with the school system. But it was just a horrible scandal, and I pray for the families that were involved with that. Selfishly, I wanted to still get a job. I wanted to get a job and work my way into corporate America. Yeah, I applied and applied and applied, and I didn't get into anywhere. I would get the first round interview with HR, and then next thing you know, they would tell me they didn't want me. And I applied to hundreds of different places just trying to get in, trying to get my foot in the door. It didn't have to be anywhere special. I just wanted to make some sort of an income after college. So, it was March of my senior year, my last semester, and I'm applying to companies still. And I went to a career fair, and at the career fair, I started talking to certain people, and I didn't feel like I really had a connection with anyone. And I remember leaving the career fair, the job fair, just completely defeated. And I saw a flyer on my way out, and it was a red and black and white flyer, and I'm like, oh, like nice colors, like who's this company? And the company was this random company by the name of the Vanguard Group. So I'm like, okay, well, like I like their colors. It seems like they're in finance. I'm in economics. So let me just go and see what they're all about. I go downstairs. I talk to this guy named Gary. Gary and I really connect. Next thing you know, Gary's like, hey, like I want to send you to the second round or first round interview with HR. Next thing you know, I'm talking to HR. And then I go through multiple interviews. And then next thing you know, I get an offer letter from Vanguard, the Vanguard Group. And they said, hey, like we want to bring you into our management leadership and development program. And I'm like, what the heck is that? But sure, I'll do it for, I think I was getting paid like $50,000 per year, like no problem. And it was my only job offer. I couldn't tell you how excited I was just have a job, period. I didn't really care who they were. I remember calling my mom and telling them that I was working for Vanguard, and she Googled it and she was like, oh, Vanguard, they have securities. So what are security? What are these investments? And I'm like, I don't know, like Vanguard Security Systems. I think they are in finance. And she's like, wait, is it like ADT security, like like home security? I'm like, I don't know. Like I applied for the job and I got it. It seems pretty like a cool job. I think it's investment related. And I literally had no clue what anything was. I didn't know what an ETF or mutual fund or stock or anything of that nature. I didn't really know what that was. So, next thing you know, I graduated from Penn State, which was a dream of mine. The entire day of graduation, I could only think about like proud my dad would have been if he was around. And a couple months later, I visited the Vanguard campus, which was in Philadelphia, which brought it full circle for me because that's where I was born. And I'm a big time Eagles fan, so I was happy to go to Philly. And then next thing you know, like I'm starting my first day at Vanguard. And I go and I take the exam to become a licensed stockbroker. I eventually pass. And next thing you know, I'm giving financial guidance to people who are calling into Vanguard. And during that time, I didn't know anything about finance. I knew what I knew from my license, to become a stockbroker, which is not an easy license to get through, but I learned a lot during that time. And luckily, Vanguard has a really good training program up front before you start talking to people on the phones. But I didn't really know all too much, right? Like, I didn't know anyone who was a quote unquote investor. I didn't know anyone who had a Roth IRA or anything of that nature. So the program was 15 months. So it was called the Vanguard Accelerated Development Program. You rotated through various departments. And I was one of 20 people that they accepted throughout the country, right? Like, my entire life, I've always thought, why me? How did I land this opportunity? A lot of, the 19 other people within this program were Ivy League kids. Their parents were private equity managers, like had multiple houses at the shore. And I'm like, my mom is at home struggling to pay her bills. And I'm in the same program with people that, they went on vacation to the Maldives, last year. Like, so it was a culture shock for me, but luckily I've always kind of been a person where I could adapt and code switch and build relationships with people that, I didn't really have much commonality with them. So that is a blessing that kind of always had. So, you kind of go through the different departments, and I was in the 401k department, the annuity department. I was working with people who had, more than $1 million at Vanguard. And I also work in the 529 department. And when I was talking to clients, I would not only solve the issue that they called in for, but I would ask them questions like, how did you accumulate this wealth? Like, what are your money habits? Like I was just so curious because they were making all this money passively. And I'm like, you make more money passively than what my mom and my dad made combined actively, working grueling jobs. So I've always kind of just wanted to be different. I wanted to know how all that stuff worked. And it started at Vanguard. Over time, I realized who Vanguard was, and I realized that it was a behemoth of a company. And at the time, we weren't the largest firm in the world, asset manager in the world. I think we're still catching up with Fidelities and BlackRocks of the world. But I was at Vanguard at a very critical time, back when Jack Bogle was still there, who was a founder of Vanguard and a really important figure for just mutual funds and index funds in general. And the leader at the time, Bill McNabb, was someone I really looked up to. So, as Vanguard was growing, I think they were at like 1 or 2 trillion at the time, which is nothing to just, gloss over. It was a lot of money. But Vanguard now is a $5 trillion, $6 trillion asset manager, I believe. And I was able to see a lot of that growth, especially with Jack Bogle still being there and, him being able to somewhat shape the company as he was still alive. So I learned a lot. I eventually became a supervisor in the 529 department. 529 are college savings programs for parents and grandparents, where essentially you put your money in. It's tax free when you put your money in, or I should say after tax when you put your money in. It grows tax free. And then if you take the money out for qualified educational expenses like laptops, tuition, whatever it might be, it's essentially tax free. So you escape a good amount of taxes with 529. So I'm a 529 supervisor there. I have a team of about 20 people, and I'm essentially helping them manage the entire organization, the 529 organization, which was great. I'm at the age of 23 being able to do that. So, kind of fast forwarding throughout my journey, I eventually got to the point where I said, hey, like, I want to leave Vanguard and go into private equity, like active management. And I joined a company where I was able to, kind of pad my sales skills and learn a different type of investing. And at the same time, I was kind of working on my own financial journey. So my financial journey was, I had $80,000 of debt, from student loan debt to my car loan to credit cards that, I essentially needed my credit cards in order to pay for certain things at school. And, I was paying off my debt. I was budgeting for the first time. I was learning how to manage my own money. And it was tough. It was a tough few years of me getting my act together and not overspending and not buying things I didn't need to buy. And then in 2018, I decided to maybe one day create a page online that will allow me to talk all things finance, because not only was I going through that journey, I just love talking about finance in general, because I just thought the idea of compound interest and passively making money was just so fascinating. It was so interesting because during the most impressionable years of my life after college, I got to see that from multimillionaires, and I learned so much during that time, and then also in college, and then growing up, about money and like what not to do and what to do, that I wanted to share it with the world. So, as I'm going through my journey of paying off debt, I started documenting online. I'm also talking about different financial topics, and the page was called BetterWallet. It's weird how life works, because I always had the plan of paying off all my debt by 2020. And eventually, I'm kind of fast forwarding through a lot of this, but eventually I ended up paying off my debt of July 2020, July 17th, 2020, the same day that my dad passed away, which was ironic. And, this was in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So a lot of people were focusing on their finances at the time, and that helped to boost the page more and more and allowed me to help more and more people. And that was great, right? So I was able to pay off my debt. I was able to give back to the world and help people manage their finances the right way. And I was able to, eventually start growing a business. At the time, I didn't really want to have a business. I was very happy at the job that I was at. by this time, I moved from that private equity firm to a fintech firm, and I was an executive at that job. And I love what I did. I love my boss. I love my colleagues, and I didn't really want to build a business, but God works in mysterious ways. So, eventually I started building something that provided passive income. And then that passive income was, starting to build, and it was enough where I could, eventually leave my job if I really wanted to. So, January of 2021 is when I started making pretty serious money, which I don't really like to talk about the money part of things. I don't really like to talk about the actual number because I don't think that's important. What was important for me was that I was helping out these families that didn't really understand finances. And I was able to help them budget, pay off debt, and start to invest. Because if it wasn't for me, then where would they have gotten that information? Me and a lot of other personal finance pages, because they don't teach us stuff in high school and they don't teach it in college, and they should. It's a shame that they don't. But next thing you have a decent amount of money coming in. You have to get a trademark, get an LLC because you want to do the record keeping and all that stuff properly. And then next thing you know, I'm quitting my job, which was crazy because I really wanted to just focus in on helping people. And November 19th of 2021 is when I gave my 2-week notice to my boss, and I started doing BetterWallet full time. Not only just the Instagram platform, but just everything that we've been able to build over the course of those years. So I was debt free. Being debt free allowed me to quit my job. Of course, the income helped as well. I was able to quit my job. And then I want to say from November 19th until now, the recording of this podcast, where it is the end of March, I mean, the brand has really just taken off. And it's a blessing that I'm able to do what I love to do and live on the legacy of my dad. And if he was here today, he just wouldn't believe what we've been able to do. And this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning of helping people manage their finances the right way. And it's the mission and goal of BetterWallet to do that. And I think we can truly change the world through talking about finance more, talking about just the hard topics that are really difficult to navigate through, and just demystifying the overall topic until it's more normalized, straightforward topic that everyone understands. So in 1 hour, that's my story. That's why I'm here. That's why I do what I do. And this is probably the longest I've ever talked about my actual story. So I'm thankful for you guys listening. And this is just the beginning. This is the beginning of the Better Wallet podcast. And we're going to dive into stories that are similar to mine. And we're going to unravel these topics more and more and help you become even better at managing your finances. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys at the next episode. But until then, this is Mark, and I am out. Thank you for tuning in to the BetterWallet podcast. If you learned something new during today's episode, please subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. We would also love a rating and review as well. In closing, remember the goal is to live a better life through taking control of your money. We want our money to work hard for us so we can live the life that we've always imagined. I'll see you on the next episode.